and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen.
All right. I'm on a wired mic, so we'll be getting some new wireless stuff in soon at some point, and I'll be able to roam around. So I kind of like to roam, you know. Any roamers around here? You like just roam around, you know? I used to watch Kung Fu, you know, how he just kind of roamed the planet. Yeah. So we're talking about resurrecting faith, and you know, if you think about that title, it makes you think, okay, well, maybe you had faith, lost it, and you're trying to find it again. Could be that maybe you never had faith. Could be that you've always struggled with faith. It could be that you've had faith your whole life, and you don't understand why anybody struggles with faith. Could be any of those things, right? But we're talking about resurrecting faith, and in particular, I'm looking at some of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. And what's fascinating is that the guys who walked closest to Jesus, if you look carefully at the resurrection stories, they all had doubts, they all had disbelief, they were all in fear, they had all failed, they had all blown it. They really were a fragmented bunch of guys when everything finally went down and Jesus was crucified, and really were bewildered and didn't know what to do, and were kind of huddled in fear with all kinds of doubts. They had expected a different outcome than what took place. They weren't expecting their rabbi to be crucified and buried. And so they were just completely undone, if you will. And they wrestled with faith even after these resurrection appearances. What's fascinating to me is that if you read these appearances closely, even in these appearances, they didn't automatically just jump into faith like solid, kind of, oh yeah, like I'll never doubt again. Even in the midst of these appearances, there was still doubting going on. I find that really interesting. And as I read through these this time, because of what I've gone through these last few years, those things really popped out to me as I reread the crucifixion and resurrection stories this time. Several years ago, I did a series called The Secret Struggles of Skepticism. The Secret Struggles of Skepticism. And I tackled all kinds of difficult issues, from faith to science to other faith traditions to suffering and evil, and just all the tough questions that we deal with as we wrestle with faith and struggle with faith. And my thesis was that most skeptics have more faith than they like to admit, and most believers have more doubt than they like to admit, including pastors. I've been in a relationship with pastors all around the world into the thousands. And pastors are human beings. Did you know that? They have all the struggles that everybody else does. If you've ever doubted that, you're here and now you know it for absolute fact. That's one thing you can have faith in. Pastors are human beings and they have all the same struggles as everybody else, all right? So, if you think about it, faith in God could be a big leap for some people. It's a hard one for many, many people. And then how does Jesus fit into that equation as well is another wrestling point with people. Well, maybe the God thing is okay for people, but what about the Jesus thing? I'm not sure about either of those maybe. This is what some people process in their brains. It can be challenging. But, we all have to have faith in something. Faith is the word that means trust, means believe. And, us human beings come out of the womb, and guess what? If somebody didn't take care of us, we would die, right? We're these unusual creatures who need to be cared for 3, 4, 5 years, some of us well into our 60s. Really, If you know my story, you know, I'm 60s now, right? So I still need taken care of. Thank God my mom and dad are here, right? They've done a great job despite me, anyway. So, but yeah, we need taken care of. So, like, you have to have faith in somebody just to survive. And then, I mean, think about the things that we have faith in that we don't even think about, like gravity. What if every day you got up and you weren't sure about gravity? What if instead of getting a weather report, you got a gravity report? What if some days, like, you're going to be stuck on the earth? You can't get off of it. You fall, you're going to hurt yourself. But what if other days it was like gravity on the moon? And you could float and fly and like, oh man, today's a good day. I get to roam and float. Yeah. Huh. I've always wanted to mountain bike on the moon. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah. And I could crash and probably not hurt myself. I mean, it'd be wonderful, I think. I don't know. But what if you had a gravity report? But, you know, we have all kinds of things that we put our faith in without even thinking about it. But then what about things like love and relationships and beauty and creativity and God? And then how does Jesus work into that thing? As many of you know, in 2019 is easily my darkest year on record. And I just was in such a dark place that I questioned even the existence of God. And I'd honestly thought about that a lot because before I became a young pastor, feeling called by God to be a pastor, I had been a person of science. What I was really good at was science and math. And before I felt called to be a pastor, I would have been pursuing one of those fields. I've loved science. I've read science my whole life, okay? So then when I became a Jesus follower and felt called to be a pastor, I was always one who was trying to integrate the best of science and the best of faith. And I love the sciences. Probably more, I read more atheist scientists than any other kind of scientists because there's more of those around, right? If you're a hard scientist, there's more atheist agnostics out there that are hard scientists than there are like believers and Jesus followers that are men and women of science. And so I've read those, but in 2019, I was in this dark place and I was like, all of my broad reading and all of my pain and suffering that I brought on myself and you know, that other situations kind of compounded it. I was just in this dark place where like, I don't even know if God exists anymore. I certainly don't feel God's presence. And if God does exist, I feel abandoned by God and I'm really angry at God. Like I really felt angry at God. Isn't that a weird thing? But I felt that. I felt super like if God does exist, then you fill in the blank. That's what I was thinking about God. Like, okay, well, then that. And that was an emotional state. So intellectually, I wasn't like going around saying, hey, I'm an atheist, okay? But I'm just saying emotionally, that's where I was at. Well, in early 2020, a person called me up who is now a friend. His name is Timmy Gibson. This is all, we've done podcasts together, so this is all public information. But Timmy is an interesting guy because he grew up in a fundamental Pentecostal church. Fundamental Pentecostal church. And then went off to a very fundamental Bible training center down in Oklahoma. And then started a church down near Olathe in Kansas City. And it grew to 300 or 400 people. But as his church was growing, he ended up going through a deconstruction of his own faith to the point where he was actually saying out loud on his podcast that he was certainly an ex-evangelical, maybe even an atheist or agnostic. And this was Timmy Gibson. Well, Timmy calls me in early 2020. This was still like on the place where I was really dark. And he says, hey, one of the people that listened to my podcast used to go to your church, and they told me I needed to call you and do a podcast interview with you. And I was like, oh, God, I hadn't done anything publicly. In fact, it wasn't until almost a year later that I did anything publicly. In fact, it was actually my friend Augie here who invited me to speak at his family Christmas, if you remember, Augie, in 2020, that actually kind of got me off my tail a little bit. So I'm so grateful for that. But anyway, I was not doing anything publicly, but I said, okay, I'll do it. Well, I didn't realize it. Timmy did a 2+ hour interview with me, and he drilled me on every evangelical kind of faith, belief, dogma thing that you could drill me on, okay? It was like almost going through a systematic theology class. He's going, what do you believe about this? What do you believe about this? What do you believe about this? And my answer was, I don't know. I'm not sure. There's this, and I'd give 3 possibilities, and then I'd be like, and then I don't know which one I believe right now. Anybody ever been in any kind of place like that? All right. Well, then he finally got down to Jesus, and I was like, well, like I actually am a Jesus guy. I've followed Jesus my whole life, and even if Jesus is just a good rabbi, I still really like Jesus' teachings and want to live by Jesus' teachings. So then we got into the Jesus thing, and that's still out there. If you ever wanted to go hear me at my most vulnerable, questioning, uncertain self, you could actually listen to that. Well, the funny thing was a few months later, Timmy gives me a call, and he says, hey, I'm doing a podcast with Adam Hamilton. Do you want to join us? Well, Adam is the pastor of Church of the Resurrection here in Kansas City, and certainly probably the largest church in Kansas City. They have a campus in Leawood and then several other campuses, and I think it's the largest Methodist church in America, okay? And Adam and I have been friends since the early 90s. We both started our church the same year in 1990. And we did stuff together in the 90s, and we've been friends. And Timmy goes, I'm doing a podcast with Adam. And I'm like going, how do you know Adam Hamilton? Well, Adam's story is he was a kid who grew up in an unchurched background, and he was at home, and some guy from a fundamental Pentecostal church knocked on his door. It wasn't Timmy, but it was a guy from Timmy's church. And Adam ended up going to church as a teenager, gave his life to Jesus, and was discipled by Timmy's parents. They were Timmy's Sunday school leaders and stuff like that. Isn't that crazy? So I said, well, sure, I'll do a podcast with you and Adam. And that one's out there too. You can listen to that. It was kind of fun. But Timmy grew up, his Sunday school teacher told him that dinosaur bones were put in the earth by the devil to deceive people. So this is how fundamental. So Timmy actually deconstructed when he just started reading good science. It's like, oh, crap. I thought the devil put those things there, And, so anyway, you can imagine, but he's a fun guy, and we've become friends. And in the last 4 years, I have sat down with hundreds, that's not an exaggeration, hundreds of people who have deconstructed, who have questioned, who have lost their faith, who have found it again, who are going through questions, doubts. So one of the things that I've realized as I've reread the Bible through the lens of a doubter is that part of the spiritual journey that we're on as human beings includes doubts, questions, and disbelief. It's a part of the spiritual journey. If you've ever had doubts, it's okay. It's okay. Now, doubts can be extremely, extremely difficult, but I think if most people are honest, we have to admit that faith and doubt kind of dance together. Some days we're big believers, and God and the universe love us, and other days we're going, oh no, God and the universe hates me. And I don't know where, it can be a wrestling match. So, in the resurrection appearances, we have Mark with 0 resurrection appearances. Mark's gospel just tells the disciples to go to Galilee and you'll see him. And then Matthew has 2 appearances, Luke has 2 appearances, and John has 4 appearances. So we will, by the end of this series, which will end in a couple of weeks, we will have covered most of those resurrection appearances, okay? So I want to read Doubting Thomas right now. All right, so John 20, verse 24. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. Okay, so some of the appearances happened right in Jerusalem on the day of the resurrection. Okay, but Thomas wasn't there on that one. So this is 8 days later. All right. So when the others saw the Lord, they said, "We have seen the Lord." But Thomas replied, "I won't believe unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hands into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. Now, I grew up on Star Trek, right? So the only picture in my mind that's ever popped in my head when these things happen is like the beam me down, Scotty, and then, you have the little materialized, and then they're there. Wouldn't that be cool? Like, so it seems like that's how Jesus' body worked. Maybe it didn't have the little, departicleization and then, regathering of all the molecules. But it's like, that's what it says. You guys ever read the Bible? The doors are locked, and then Jesus shows up. Boom. And he didn't come through the door. He didn't unlock it, open the door. He's just, psst. Have you ever wondered, if there was a video camera in the room, would have recorded it? You ever wondered that? What's interesting is that when Jesus appeared to Paul, by the way, we'll talk about this because the last resurrection appearance I'm going to cover is Paul's, okay? But the people that were with Paul actually didn't see Jesus. Only Paul saw him. Isn't that interesting? Have any of you ever seen something that other people didn't see? Or have you ever heard something that other people didn't hear? You're going, "Oh, I don't know how to answer this. I might end up in the psych ward. I don't know, I always check, if I hear something in my brain and I just want to, "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Okay, I just want to make sure I'm okay or not okay. I don't know. Anyway. But he just appears, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." And then Thomas did that, right? And then his response, "My Lord and my God." But then Jesus didn't demean him for his doubt, but he makes this statement: "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." That's why I asked the question, have you ever seen anything that maybe others haven't seen? Have you ever heard anything that maybe others haven't heard? And there's a bit of mystical dynamic to this faith experience. Sometimes we don't believe certain things until we see them, feel them, hear them, touch them. And that can maybe not even be concrete, but even mystical. So I believe that faith and doubt dance together. And even though doubt can lead us into a dark, dark place, when I was questioning everything, and even questioning the existence of God, and even being angry at God if God did exist, that dark, dark space. By the way, if you read the biographies of some of the great faith leaders throughout the last 2,000 years of church history, you're going to find that that's not an uncommon experience with even the strongest of faith leaders, by the way, including Jesus himself, who questioned, my God, why have you forsaken me? He felt betrayed. So there's this dance with doubt, but doubt can take us to dark, dark places. There's some communities of faith where if you question what that community believes, then you're kicked out or you're not accepted. I would rather build a community of faith where doubts, questions, and disbelief are out in the open and honest, and where we wrestle with those together. And Ben, I forgot to show my pictures, but the reason why can we go back to that? Or Can we do that? I meant to start with this, but remember, I've been showing this picture. This is an icon from the Western tradition of the church, the Catholic Protestant tradition, where Jesus in that tradition is always depicted as making a solo flight into heaven by himself. And that's probably better described as the ascension, not the resurrection, but in the West, this is called resurrection. And so we have this idea of a solo flight by Jesus in heaven. But the Eastern church, show that one, always depicts the resurrection as a community event. Here, Jesus is grabbing the hand of Adam and Eve, which represents humanity. If you see the little plants around there in the picture, resurrection is something that happens on earth in community. The Eastern church always depicts resurrection as a community event right here on earth. So we're a part of the resurrected ones in Jesus. Paul said the resurrection's already begun right now. And what I found is that, my faith took flight again in circles of recovery people who were struggling with addictions and doubts and belief in God. And that's where kind of my rebirth of faith began, and reading some books by Richard Rohr, a Franciscan father. And so there's a lot of ways that faith can reemerge in our lives in new and fresh ways. But initially, doubt can be a very dark, dark experience. Rachel Held Evans was a young lady who wrestled with her faith. And she wrote a book called Searching for Sunday. She ended up dying tragically as a very young woman, maybe around 30, from a rare disease. But she says this: there are recovery programs for people grieving the loss of a parent, sibling, or spouse. You can buy books on how to cope with the death of a beloved pet or work through the anguish of a miscarriage. We speak openly with one another about the bereavement that can accompany a layoff, a move, a diagnosis, or a dream deferred. But no one really teaches you how to grieve the loss of your faith. You're on your own for that. It became increasingly clear that my fellow Christians didn't want to listen to me or grieve with me or walk down this frightening road with me. They wanted to fix me. They wanted to wind me up like an old-fashioned toy and send me back to the fold with a painted smile on my face and tiny symbols in my hand. Isn't that interesting? Faith can be a struggle for some people. And I think we need to have communities that are confident to allow that struggle to happen and to be authentic about it and to love people through it. It's a normal thing. The disciples all struggle with it. Why would we ever think that there would be a Christian community who doesn't have any doubt and then not let people in who have doubts? It's antithetical to the whole of the experience of the people that we read in the Bible. So, doubt can also lead to growth. Sometimes it's good to doubt and question. Do you know that? Think about Galileo. I fell in love with Galileo when Queen sang about him. I'm a 70s guy at heart, folks. You just got to know that. All you young people, you got to go back and listen to Freddie Mercury, Queen, Galileo. All right. I can't sing either, so anyway. I can just get up and talk. That's all I do anyway, so. But, so Galileo was one of these guys who started studying astronomy, and he came to this conclusion that, the sun doesn't circle around the earth. Radical idea, right? Guys, I think actually the earth rotates around the sun. Well, the Catholic Church declared this a heresy and locked him up. He wrote his last couple of books from jail. Thank God they didn't kill him because he wrote some good stuff in jail. But think about that. They thought that threatened the foundations of the faith. Now, today we look on that and we go that's crazy. But doubt and uncertainty and questions can sometimes lead us to very important progress and growth. How many of you ever heard clinically in the psychology world of post-traumatic growth. You go through a major trauma, and religious trauma is a real deal, but then you emerge out of that in a new growth phase if we respond in ways that are healthy, right? And so I think that doubt can be celebrated because it can lead to growth. Brian McLaren, I recommend 2 books by Brian. I did a podcast interview with him last year on these 2 books. One is called Faith After Doubt, and the other one is called Do I Stay Christian? And I encourage you to read those if you're a reader, or you can get an audiobook and listen, especially if you've ever had doubts, wrestled with those. But he took the Beatitudes and kind of made a doubter's beatitude. And I like this. It says, this is Brian from his book, Faith After Doubt. Blessed are the curious, for their curiosity honors reality. Blessed are the uncertain and those with second thoughts, for their minds are still open. Blessed are the wanderers, for they shall find what is wonderful. Blessed are those who question their answers, for their horizons will ever expand. Blessed are those who often feel foolish, for they are wiser than those who always think themselves wise. Blessed are those who are scolded, suspected, and labeled as heretics by the gatekeepers, like Galileo, right? For the prophets and the mystics were treated in the same way as the gatekeepers of their day, by the gatekeepers of their day. Blessed are those who know their unknowing, for they shall have the last laugh. Blessed are the perplexed, for they have reached the frontiers of contemplation. Blessed are they who become cynical about their cynicism and suspicious of their suspicions, for they will enter a second innocence. I like that, a second innocence. Blessed are the doubters, for they shall see through false gods. Blessed are the lovers, for they shall see God everywhere. Ooh, I like that. And at the conclusion, Brian was like saying, hey, if I had to put bumper stickers on this book, which he hates, by the way, but if I did, he'd say, before doubt, you have all the right answers. After doubt, revolutionary love. And you're okay with uncertainty. You see, doubt is not the opposite of faith. Uncertainty can be the opposite of faith sometimes. Fear can be the opposite of faith sometimes. But doubt and faith dance together in this human experience. And it can lead to some beautiful growth. Think about these disciples. Busted, torn up, failed, denied. One committed suicide. I mean, it's a mixed batch of people, right? And then we have these appearances of Jesus. And they don't just eliminate all the doubts immediately. For some it did, for some it didn't. What's interesting to me is if you think about resurrection happening in community, is that something happened with this group of broken, failed, doubting, fearful disciples. Something happened. Something transpired in these resurrection appearances that caused their faith to begin to reemerge. But new, different. It wasn't the same. In fact, they never went back to some of the things that they believed before Jesus died and rose. They never went back to some of those things. It emerged in different ways, but they ended up banding together in community and continued to follow the teachings of this Rabbi Jesus from Galilee. And guess what? If you look at how their lives went from that point on, they didn't get rich because of it. It wasn't like a financial prosperity plan for these guys. In fact, most of them went on to lead these communities of Jesus followers and ended up giving their life for it. They were persecuted for it. They actually died for it, which is kind of bizarre to think about this. Do you know that the Greco-Roman government, the imperial government of Rome, had an imperial theology that said Caesar is Son of God, Caesar is Lord, Caesar is Savior. And Rome brings the Pax Romana, the peace to the world. There's this little band of persecuted people who are like going, Jesus is Son of God, Jesus is Savior, Jesus is Lord. And you know what they were called by the Romans? They were called atheists. Do you know why they were called atheists? Because they didn't believe in all of the Roman gods, and they didn't believe in Caesar as Son of God, as Lord, and as Savior. And so the Romans called these new little band of Jesus followers atheists. Because we can't figure them out, but they love people. They care for the poor. They care for the marginalized and the broken. They like accept people and love people no matter where they're at. And they support one another and they love one another and they worship together and they serve the community together and they do these kind of Jesus things together. And it's like, God, there's these atheists. We got to kill them. We've got to stomp them out. Something happened, right, in this community of doubters where it emerges in new faith, new dynamics. Think about following Jesus, even as Rabbi Jesus. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself, love even your enemies. And I like to say it's kind of hard to go wrong if you really live by that. If you really live by that. So let's pray. God, come, do a work in our hearts today. Wherever we're at on that spectrum of faith, God, some might be like going, I don't believe in any of this stuff, or I don't know where I'm at, or I'm struggling, or I'm doubting, or I'm this or that, or whatever. But in love together, as we look to Jesus as rabbi, as a model, as example, as an incarnation of God's love, then may we be people who radically love God, love others, love ourselves, love even